And I think one of the things that I just find strange is that companies aren't assuming enough of the responsibility on themselves too, right?
But I would say that it feels like a bubble. So there's a massive amount of money being invested right now. There are some elements that may be better served with more traditional approaches.
Hi, I'm Ben Carr, and we're here with another interesting conversation. And today, Patrick Klein with Syn Ventures.
Kind of a security lifer, been there and done that in many different roles, pentesting, auditing, did a couple of startup companies, was a CISO 4 times over for large companies, and then have been on the investment side as a professional VC since 2017.
With AI, it's all about speed. It's all about the ability of the attacker to respond in speed and in mass much faster than defense can do. In actual reality, you're still going to have, we have to be right all the time, right? The attacker only has speed once. We've all heard that.
The attackers are adopting, the defenders have to adopt. So it's like that cat and mouse game. All of a sudden, the cat and the mouse are both running much faster.
You've been the 4-time CISO. How would you navigate that?
Operational failures can come in many different places. And what bubbles up to a board?
Hi, I'm Ben Carr, and we're here with another interesting conversation. And today, Patrick Klein with Syn Ventures. Patrick, thanks for showing up.
Thank you, Ben. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know you, you've been in the industry for quite a long time. You're most recently with Syn. But can you give maybe a little bit of background, introduce yourself,
Yeah, kind of a security lifer, been there and done that in many different roles, pentesting, auditing, did a couple of startup companies, was a CISO 4 times over for large companies, and then have been on the investment side as a professional VC since 2017.
Yeah, so you like the investment side, I know, right? You enjoyed doing that. What did you not like about being a CISO, being a practicing CISO?
Oh, whenever my phone vibrates at 3 a.m. in the morning and the uncertainty of that. And it's there's I think a Greek legend called the Sword of Damocles, basically, where you have a sword suspended over your head on a horsehair. And it doesn't exactly apply, but it kind of reminds me of that, being in the CISO seat.
Yeah, it can feel like that at sometimes. Look, it's a good role. I think we all enjoy it when we're doing it. But getting out of it, getting a little space from it, sometimes it's a nice respite.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how's investing been going in the cyber side? Is it good? Is it bad? What's the market like right now?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of deal flow. We're seeing a huge number of companies that are out there. Investing in cyber has been reinvigorated, I would say. That's a kind word to use, by all the interest in artificial intelligence that we're seeing and the investments that are going on in that space. TBD, the impact on cyber AI actually has on cyber.
Yeah, so let's put a pin in that. I do want to ask you one question before we jump into AI and cyber and where it goes. But I'm interested you're kind of more on the professional side of investing in companies. And I've read some interesting articles lately about exits and where a company should exit. Wizz, right? I thought that was really interesting. What are your thoughts there? Do you have any epiphanies?
In terms of Wizz turning down Google's offer?
Yeah.
No inside information or epiphanies, but...
No, more. What did you think about it? Right, not insider baseball, but just how did it strike you?
Well, number one, the intent of Google to acquire Wizz is an escalation. It's the big boys, the Microsofts, the Amazons will have to respond to that and basically say this is an indication that Google was deadly serious about entering and being a big player in the cybersecurity market. So I think that's going to stir up some activity. In terms of Wizz making a decision, or the implicit decision that they're going to go public, everything I can see, they have phenomenal customers, they have the growth, they have the revenue. So it comes down to kind of at the end of the day, the financial analysis behind it. And I'm not privy to the actual numbers, kind of why the board made that decision. But again, what I hear from people about Wizz is they have an amazing culture, very rapid ability to iterate, very strong engineering-led culture. So as long as that keeps clicking, I think I would love to see them go public.
So the one other thing that kind of has been big news lately was CrowdStrike, right? Happened recently. So what do you think about that? Not a responsibility or errors or that kind of stuff, but more impact to cyber startups and companies and how enterprise companies are going to evaluate implications of their cyber rollouts in the future. Do you think there'll be an impact to that, or
it'll? So a couple of different thoughts. I don't think anybody in their risk and resilience plan is going to have a line item in there that basically said, yes, it's if kernel level code fails, it's going to take us down, and we plan for this. So this is kind of a black swan event, even though we've seen similar events in the past. It was something that was somewhat unprecedented. Is it going to affect startup companies? Probably not, because at the end of the day, the number of companies that are playing in the kernel space are relatively few. And many of the newer companies that are having to deeply inspect systems are architected around the use of technologies like eBPF for the Linux world, which I believe is meant to be safer basically than having a kernel driver. But it's like TBD. I haven't seen it impact the startup ecosystem. It's still very early, of course. But I will say that if you are developing in the kernel space, I think both Microsoft, Apple, and everybody else is probably going to revisit their own quality assurance and plans around which vendors do they allow to play in that space. And secondarily, I think we're post-incident, of course, we're going to see customers asking questions of vendors that are operating in the kernel space about their quality assurance.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of fingers have been pointed at CrowdStrike, and I think one of the things that I just find strange is that companies aren't assuming enough of the responsibility on themselves too, right? Making sure that they're not rolling out to their global population the newest, release, right? Like test first. It's a best practice scenario, right? Test the release, make sure that you've got a test bed that you don't see impact in a production environment before you do a further global rollout. Like I would like to see more of that. And I think in resilience plans, it's something we'll probably have to see.
I think we'll see that. I am concerned though that there could be a knee-jerk reaction that auto updates for everything are turned off. And right now, it's like I think we're in a bit of an accelerated world, kind of like to pull it back to AI, which I think benefits attackers right now more than defenders. That if you're not set up to react rapidly, to detect rapidly, to be constantly on the edge, basically, of the rapid innovation on the attacker side, you're going to put yourself in a bad position. So
yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like, again, I'm not advocating like waiting 6 months, but like I think a couple days doing a test. But certainly, like there are a lot of technologies where the speed, and let's transition back into the AI side of it. Like with AI, like it's all about speed. It's all about the ability of the attacker to respond in speed and in mass much faster than defense can do. So what do you see in AI? And like we've heard a lot about it at RSA. It's big talk, now. Is it all hype? Is it all real? Like where's the meat?
There's no easy binary answer of all this and that or yes or no. But the way I view it is, at a minimum, there are two forces that are opposing each other when it comes to AI. One of them is the expectation of exponential growth. And, this goes back to a book I read called The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil, which is phenomenal, by the way. But, there was, which is predicting that the technology is exponential. And I think what we saw with ChatGPT first coming on the market or being visible to people is like, oh my God, this is amazing. Where that exponential curve may have exceeded the linear perception that we have about we expect things to move in a linear way. And everybody was shocked in a very surprising way that led to the wave of investment that we currently have in artificial intelligence technology. That was the catalytic event. So that's one force, which is that the wishfulness around exponential growth. The other one is, I would say, the law of diminishing marginal returns, which is the force that holds you back. And I like to maybe poke a little bit as an example. Something like Tesla's full self-driving. We were first introduced to the concept in the initial works around 2017, I believe, if I remember right. And it's still not quite there yet. And the reality is that I believe that when you start getting to mission-critical and life-critical systems, there is an expectation of, like 5 nines, 6 nines plus. We haven't done the calculus of what's acceptable, but there's near perfection that's required to be really dependent on the system. And the law of diminishing marginal returns is basically that it's easy to get from, say, for example, 0 to 99% on the system.
Yeah, but you can never get the last piece of the curve.
But 99 to 99.9 is 10 times harder. 99.99 is 10.
So not just harder, but the cost.
So it's that initial sense, back to like human perception as well, because we got so fast from 0 to 99, there is a perception again of linear improvement, and we're going to hit that 100 really soon. So when the reality may be that there is much more complexity in a system, many more corner cases to be discovered, issues, like hallucinations and things like that. So many different things that need to be figured out before we can rely on them. So in the context of cyber, though, I do believe that when we see AI systems being applied, they are going to be significant efficiency boosters. They're going to be like the power suit you can wrap around a human being to make them stronger, more efficient, more effective. It's probably going to have an impact on entry-level cyber jobs in a way, but it's also not going to be transformative for the very reason that I said that earlier, that the attackers are adopting it.
And so do diminishing returns really come into play there as well, right? Like on the cyber side, are we going to see the expectation that things are going to be solved really quickly, but in actual reality, like you're still going to have, we have to be right all the time, right? The attacker only has to be words. We've all heard that. So do you have this thing where AI gets really, really good, but there's still gaps that we're kind of missing because we're assuming the AI is going to take responsibility?
I don't know about gaps we're going to be missing. I just think we're in a state of accelerationism. We're in an accelerated state. The attackers are adopting, the defenders have to adopt. So it's like that cat and mouse game. All of a sudden, the cat and the mouse are both running much faster.
Yeah.
The problem is, if you're not a cat or a mouse and you're standing on the sidelines, you're potentially victimized by this. So I think it's going to force a acceleration of or reevaluation of cybersecurity portfolios and capabilities across the board from a defender perspective. And it is creating new opportunities from an investment perspective as well. Kind of like, what are these next generation of companies or capabilities that are going to be able to keep up with the speed of innovation on the attacker side? So
when you think about the investment side, I've been positing that there's kind of three places AI fits into cyber, right? The first one is the defense, right? So AI being used by a CISO or his teams to kind of help out the defensive capabilities they have. The attacker side, right? Okay. So somebody coming in and actually using AI to accelerate attacks, attack faster, easier, lower the cost. And then third, kind of the middle is actually attacking the models themselves, right? The AI itself. So if you look at those three, do you see a fourth or fifth? Am I missing something there? Are those three valid? And then as a follow-on, where do you see the most bang for the buck in the investment? Where should CISOs focus?
So I don't have a complete framework in my mind. I mean, we talk about the attacker and the defender, basically, that's happening. In terms of like attacking with the models and whatnot, I'm not sure we'll see a lot of evidence of that. I mean, if you look at it, you can achieve your economic objectives as a bad guy or political objectives if you're a nation state without necessarily going after like models that are just nascent in terms of being adopted. So
but maybe we've seen poisoning and bias, right? Like those are certainly...
Bias is not an attack against the model. But,
but it's a problem with the model, right? Like,
Yeah, but even the poisoning stuff, I think the number of cases there, I think, are still relatively low. So, we placed a bet on a company called Cranium, and the folks, what they're doing is a much more universal need, which is as enterprises rush to adopt AI, they do need to have governance and risk frameworks around that. They need to be able to measure, monitor, discover, whatnot, basically, what's going on. It can't be a land rush, basically. So I think if I think about priorities of risks around AI in the enterprise, just basically going hog wild without oversight is a much bigger risk than potentially somebody in the future trying to poison the model or manipulate it in some interesting way. So, and at the end of the day, I think the role of the CISO, because we're dealing with almost infinite attack surfaces, defenders, is it's really a forced prioritization function. You have limited resources, you have to understand your risks, and you have to prioritize and carve out the ones you're actually going to focus on.
I think that's the hope on the defensive side, right? Is AI becomes that force multiplier to hopefully extend the capabilities without extending the resource side.
I think it can be, yes. It's like, again, if you choose wisely and on the implementation, absolutely.
And I think you called out a very valid thing is we're, a CISO trying to figure out how to get control over the estate and the growth of AI within the enterprise. Like that's been a real challenge for a lot of people because the business wants to move much faster than the capabilities that the security team have allowed.
Yeah. And again, this is why I think having discovery mechanisms, understanding, defining guardrails and policies around it is extremely important. In some cases, even preempting, meaning that you're the one involved as a security leader, not just like being reactive, but actually getting engaged and being upfront in the business level discussions so you understand it and you can inform the investments.
Yeah, that's something I think we've talked about a lot is trying to get the CISO more aligned with the business, right? I don't think the CISO is necessarily the technical role that many people thought it used to be. Do you see anything on the horizon from an investment side of helping CISOs move more into that business-focused realm? one of my challenges was always when I talk to vendors, it's a lot of speeds and feeds. The reporting's a lot of data and analytics, and my board doesn't want to see data and analytics, right? They want to understand risk tolerance and, is this a worthwhile investment? What's the value return out of it?
Yeah, we are seeing a number of companies right now that, the general model is that AI is going to unlock our abilities to do a lot of quantitative analysis around security programs. So being able to ingest state information around the environment, the controls, as well as then information about actual access and usage and whatnot, anomalies and risks and threats, munging it all together and then coming up with kind of like taking that prioritization algorithm out of the judgment of the CISO to some extent, being able to demonstrate here are the actual priorities based on ingesting all of this. So we do see promise based on that technology. I think we're pretty optimistic about AI, especially LLMs, and being able to ingest and make sense out of all of this to really help focus the security programs of companies.
Patrick, really good discussion. I appreciate your insights. So it sounds like you're bullish on AI as being a positive force and potentially something we should all be greater concerned about. Is that a fair estimate?
It's I don't want to be like bifurcating saying bullish or bearish on something like this, but I would say that it feels like a bubble. Okay, so there's a massive amount of money being invested right now. And if you look back in history, basically true innovation, I think, is sometimes driven by constraints. So, it feels a bit like a Wild West from an investor right now, the number of companies that are looking at AI plus security. And there are some elements that may be better served with more traditional approaches. And I'll give you an example. That we have an email anti-phishing company. And as we looked into kind of like what's the ability for their use of ML models versus LLMs, basically, to detect phishing messages, we did identify that the LLM is going to be more effective by a certain percentage margin. But at the end of the day, the efficiency of an ML model means that the LLM is potentially 10,000 times more expensive as well. So, it's like, so we have to look at it from a use case perspective, try to understand the flow of the information, how real time is it, and the cost associated with it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the balance of the risk discussion, right? Like, there's been we had a conversation earlier with someone regarding asset management inventory, right? And that's been a failure for quite a long time in the industry. And I think people focusing on some of the basics and hygiene can have a much greater level of return than kind of focusing on the shiny bubble and trying to figure out what's going on.
I think there are a lot of quote unquote security investments that are not actually investments in security technology. So it's modernizing the technology stack, focusing on automation to some extent on maybe the IT side and the technology side. There are a lot of areas where you can create more sustainability around security. The hallmark, the flip side of it is, when I hear organizations where the vast majority of their security problem is still having the resources to apply patches, it basically means to me that I think they're probably fighting a losing battle in the sense that they haven't thought systemically about security yet and made investments that make some of these lower order elements go away so they can focus on the more interesting stuff.
So do you think we'll see actually a push towards more focus on security from the boardroom, right? Because that's been one of the things I think we've seen recently with the challenge of there just hasn't been the right level of focus and concern there. But the level of attacks, we recently, I think it came out this week, $75 million ransomware payment from a Fortune 50, right? That would certainly raise my level of concern, being in a board, being an investor.
Yeah.
But it seems like we've seen time and time again, it's, there's an interest and then it fades away. So where do you see that?
So I don't have hard data points, but I would say that based on what I see, there is a fair amount of boardroom concern about cybersecurity. The question is, do they have the skills to really estimate?
That was my question. Really, is the expertise there, right?
Is the expertise, or are they being told, yay, it's okay, basically? And so it's like, it's like, are they erring on overfunding right now? But the underlying, maybe the leadership isn't there on the IT and security side. It's unclear to me. I don't know. But, board members, I think they're inundated right now. It's like you open up the Wall Street Journal on a daily basis. It's one thing or another. And I think the NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors, also has guidance around this. There have been talk around building more, I wouldn't say credibility, but having board members that are knowledgeable in cybersecurity.
So Digital Directors Network has a certification, the QTE, right?
Yeah.
So qualified technical expert.
So I don't know how much it's at the board level versus elsewhere.
So where elsewhere, define elsewhere.
Yeah, like I said, I was like, operational failures can come in many different places. And I mean, what bubbles up to a board? Okay. So it's like there's a lot of, distillation of complexity, basically, by the time it gets...
Well, you're a board member, right? You sit
Yes.
on a board, right? So what are, speaking to a CISO, what are the concerns you have? What do you want out of a CISO as a board member? What are you trying to get to? Because I think there's often a disconnect.
Yeah. Paranoia, honesty. I want them... So if I am skeptical of anybody who gives me too many green lights. that's the so it's like, I appreciate how complicated the entire space of cybersecurity is, and anybody who has a sense of confidence that we're doing great, it's almost like the Dunning-Kruger effect, basically, is like the more competent you are, the likelihood is that you really don't grasp the complexity of the problem. Ergo, the less competent you are.
Yeah, so there's a challenge there. Like sitting in the CISO role, this is one of the things that I often have found to be concerning, is if the reporting structure in an organization where the CISO sits and where security reports to, traditionally it used to be the CIO, right? And a lot of times there's a conflict of interest there. And when you'd want to push something up, there's a hesitancy, I think, from other E-staff members to want to say, hey, in fact, I can think of a specific example when I went in and we were looking at a heat map, and we were looking at where cyber risk fit on the trajectory of the heat map. And the pushback I got was, it's a little too reddish orange. Can we move it down a little more towards yellow green? And my concern was, I spoke to the other person. I said, well, you understand, impact and risk, right? And when we looked at that and we broke it down, it was like we all agreed that was the right intersection in the red-orange, but the perception was we didn't want to show that to the board. And I think I'm clearly agreeing with you. Like, we should show reality, right? The transparency there, because then we can actually take an assessment of what should we do? How should we approach it? Do we accept the risk? Do we address the risk? Do we transfer the risk? But like pushing that down is, I think the CISO is sometimes caught in that difficult bargain between not wanting to highlight problems to the board, because sometimes that's the perception.
And that was kind of my point earlier when you asked me if it's not the board, where is the problem? And maybe there are systemic problems with other areas of management, teams, whatnot, not necessarily being aligned with the paranoia and the focus on erring on the side of risk that the CISO may exhibit. And things get distilled and filtered.
Any advice to a CISO who's caught in that difficult position of how to navigate that effectively? If you were in the role, if you've been the 4-time CISO, how would you navigate that?
It's really tough. Because you also, if you're a good CISO, you're going to be somewhat humble. Do they have a perspective that I don't understand? Am I overestimating risk? You're going to be asking yourself on some of these things. Now, obviously, if you haven't applied patches from 2 years ago or something like that, that there is no overestimating that risk. So it's going to be very situational, but you do have to work within the political framework of the company. I would argue what helped me was having an advocate on the board, having a relationship with a board member who is technical and interested in cybersecurity that can also coach me and guide me, basically, before I go to the board and make a presentation.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, right? I think that's an opportunity. I think you get to a certain level and you may think you can only mentor someone, when I think this is a good example for you to be a mentee with someone on the board. Yeah. So, someone who's getting into the game now and maybe an aspiring CISO, or somebody who already is, a director, VP, a CISO, and they're thinking, eventually I'd like to do what Patrick would. I'd like to get more in the investment side of it. Like, what should they focus on? What advice would you give to a young Patrick Heim out there to figure out where to go, what to do?
I would say don't be only a security nerd, and focus on other parts of the business. Be recognized as a resource in the business for having ability to engage and having knowledge about the business. Classic case was my friend Joe Sullivan, when he was at Uber, basically, and then at, let's call it again, Cloudflare, basically, he reported to the CEO, but he put himself out as a well-rounded executive as a whole, basically. So building that, I don't you have to be around it, and then you have to expose yourself also to environments where investors know you and they work with you and they trust you and they know how you think.
Yeah, Patrick, great conversation. Thanks for joining us today, and as always, you're very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Take care.